Okay, folks, now that you've been working on ionic compound writing and naming, we are going to go ahead and move on to our next type of bond, which is the covalent bond. And if you recall from the very beginning of the unit, a covalent compound occurs between two or more nonmetals only. So needless to say, if you see a metal or a polyatomic ion, it is not a covalent compound. And what's happening to the electrons in a covalent compound is they're being shared. They are not being transferred. That is an ionic compound. They're literally being shared between the atoms. So just to give you a real quick example here, if I have two chlorine atoms, so Cl2, so we know that's covalent because chlorine's a nonmetal and there's two of them. If I were to actually draw out the bond, here are my two chlorines, and chlorine has 7 valence, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you take a look here, they both have 7. So they don't want to give up anything because they're so close to the magic number of 8. So really what happens is that single guy right there and that single guy right there, that's what ends up being shared between them. And if they share it between them, then they each are going to have 8. You don't have to worry about drawing that out. I was just trying to show you where the sharing takes place. So here's the big thing to remember. There are no charges with a covalent compound because the electrons are not being transferred. That's why students always love the covalent compounds. They say they're so easy to do because you don't have to think about charges and you don't have to crisscross charges like you did all week when dealing with an ionic compound. None of that here. No charges with the covalent compound, so please don't make it harder than what it's supposed to be. So let's jump right into it. We're going to start with naming first. Before I can show you how to name, covalent compounds are all based off of prefixes. So what I'm going to ask you to do off to the side is write down your prefixes. So 1, the prefix for 1 is mono. The prefix for 2 is di. Prefix for 3 is tri. The prefix for 4 is tetra. The prefix for 5 is penta. Prefix for 6 is hexa. Prefix for 7 is hepta. Prefix for 8 is octa. Prefix for 9 is nona. And prefix for 10 is deca. No, you don't have to memorize these. I will give them to you, but you should know the more common ones. Okay, so now that you have your prefixes, here is how you name them. You're going to look at your compound, and first off, these are all covalent because they're all nonmetals. And you want to look at these little subscripts. These little subscripts are going to tell you what prefix to use when you name this compound. So let's take a look at this first one. Boron doesn't have a subscript next to it. Well, remember, in chemistry, we don't have to write the number 1. So when you don't see a subscript, you just assume it's a number 1. If you only have one atom with the first element listed, you don't have to use the prefix mono. Okay, so in this case, we only have one atom, and we don't use the word mono then if it's the first atom. So really, we just name it as is. So boron. And now if you look at your second atom, you have 3 of them. 3 goes with tri. So this is fluorine. We still change the ending to IDE just like you did with ionic bonds. So it's going to be trifluoride. Trifluoride, and there's that ending of IDE. The next one, good old sulfur, only has one atom. Once again, if it's the first atom listed and he only has one, you don't use the prefix mono. So we'll just write it as is, sulfur. And now the second atom has 2. 2 goes with di. So this is really oxygen. Change the ending to IDE. So it's going to be dioxide. Okay, third one, your first atom has 2, so we need our prefix. So 2 goes with di. So it's going to be dioxygen. Nowhere do we ever change the first atom's name to IDE. Okay, remember that's only the second atom listed with ionic and covalent. So dioxygen, and then if you look at your next guy, he has 2, and that's fluorine. So difluoride. Okay, look at this one. Oh, do we see a problem here? Xenon. Xenon's in group 18. Does group 18 ever bond with anyone? No, because they already have a full outer shell of 8 valence electrons, so no good. All right, next one. This is phosphorus. He only has 1 atom, so once again, if it's the first atom and there's only 1, you don't use the prefix. So phosphorus. And then there are 5 chlorines. 5 goes with penta. So penta, instead of chlorine, chloride. Change that ending to IDE. And then lastly, you have 2 nitrogens. 2 goes with di. So di-nitrogen. And then you have 3 oxygens. 3 goes with tri. So tri, and then you change that ending to IDE. Okay? So that is how you name your covalent compounds. So how do you write formulas? Writing the formulas are really nice and easy. I have a little chart here for us. So once again, you're going to use your prefixes to determine how many atoms you have. So if you look at the first one, we're dealing with boron. Boron is letter B. And then if you take a look at the second one listed, the second atom, it's chloride, right? So that's really chlorine before we changed the ending. So chlorine is Cl. So now let's write our formula. We'll rewrite our symbols and we use our prefixes. So with boron, there was a di, and di means 2. So put your little 2 next to boron, your subscript. And with chlorine, there was hexa, and hexa means 6. And that is it. Okay, look at your next one. You have carbon, and you have oxide, which is really oxygen. And now put your symbols together and use your prefixes. Well, there is no prefix on carbon, so remember, that's where we just assume it's 1. And then oxygen has di, and di means 2. Okay, next one is carbon again. And then iodide is really iodine, and that's capital I. Put your symbols together. So once again, carbon doesn't have a prefix, so it's just 1. And then iodide has tetra in front of it, and tetra means 4. Okay, next one we have phosphorus, which is letter P. And you have bromide, which is really bromine, which is Br. Put your symbols together. Okay, phosphorus, once again, doesn't have a prefix, so it's just 1. But bromine or bromide has penta, and penta means 5. And then lastly, sulfur is letter S, and an oxide was really oxygen. Put your symbols together. Nothing for sulfur, it's just a 1, but oxygen has 3. Tri means 3, so there's my 3. And that is it for your covalent compounds.